will welcome everyone. So this is a live virtual roundtable event where we will discuss building go-to-market teams internationally. I'm your moderator, Milica Rogic, and I'm executive director of Halo International, a Serbian-based recruiting and custom development firm that provides offshore resources to technology clients in the US. Halo hosts these monthly virtual table events like this one for the HR and technology leaders on a variety of topics, and we look forward to seeing you at the future Halo event. This event is also being recorded, so feel free to drop any questions that you have into the Q&A function, and we will address them once they come in or at the end of the session, depending on how the discussion is going. And I will also be sharing a survey to gather your feedback, and we will post a recorded version on YouTube afterwards as well. Okay, so today we are joined by a great group of professionals and passionate talent acquisition leaders. Without further ado, I'm excited to introduce all of you. So first, I'd like to introduce Rachel Blezard. She's the head of people operations at Virtual. So Rachel has over 20 years of experience in talent acquisition and people operations across various sectors. Also, previous success scaling teams and establishing positive work cultures within tech startups. She has been with Virtual for almost 4 years, and she has grown the team from 20 to 120 across all functions. Thank you for joining us, Rachel. All right. So our next panelist, Luis Garcia de la Cruz. I think I said that right. He is a senior people partner, also a team lead at Revolut. And Luis has extensive experience also setting up a people function from scratch. And currently he's leading a team of people partners covering the product and tech business units and Spanish territory. We're excited to have you, Luis. Thank you. And our final panelist today, Alexander Popov, also very seasoned talent acquisition professional and with successful track record in building global cross-functional teams, scaling SaaS businesses. Thank you for joining, Alexander. All right, so let's take a deep dive into our questions we have for today. The first one, and really lengthy and most important one, what is the biggest challenge you experience facing an organization building a go-to-market team internationally before, during, and after? Alexander, why don't you start us off with the before part?
Well, thank you very much, Milica. Good day to everyone. Pleasure being here and having to share some of my experience looking at the go-to-market teams and how we establish them internationally. So thinking about, perhaps if I have to lay out one biggest challenge, that would be the adaptation to the local norms. And by local norms, I think this is quite a big topic and a big subject that anything can go in. Perhaps from being aware of what the language that's spoken in the place that you want to grow in is, perhaps going to religion, which then overlaps often to holidays. And here it's perhaps one of the key aspects of diversity and inclusion. What kind of things do you look at diversity and inclusion? What is relevant for the market that you want to go into? Would it be religion focused? Would it be skin color? Would it be anything that would fall within diversity and inclusion is predominantly and perhaps has happened within the formation of the language, religion, and of course when you've seen the holidays as well. So adapting to all of that is quite, I'd say, scary at first, and perhaps it's the first challenge that one needs to realize as an organization. Even when you go on a holiday, if you wish, in a different country, and you're struck by a language that you've never heard before, you know, that's the first bit, which perhaps may scare you right from the door. Then I mentioned it's a big thing, local norms, educational systems. When we're saying a go-to-market team, of course, we'll be looking for perhaps a leader. It can be an inside sales manager or a sales manager or director of sales, however you would like to call the person. But then you have perhaps a few account executives, perhaps account managers. But then you also have these entry-level role, which some may call an SDR. Others may say it's an AAR or any kind of an R, where the person will be doing cold calling, setting the things, utilizing Salesforce quite a lot. So normally you would look for some experience, but also the profile would perhaps open to people that are recent graduates or still in the education, which means that how the educational system is structured, knowing which universities to tap, knowing what kind of subjects to look into, can also be critical in the adaptation to that new market. Then this may sound funny, but often there are time zone differences. And what happens in the future for me in Melbourne then happens in the past to me in the US. So sitting in front of such time zone differences, one has to be very careful understanding those and realizing that international experience means thinking about APAC, thinking about EMEA, and then of course US, Canada, South America, North America, all of that has to be there. So then looking further into the local norms, how would you, and I've touched already on that piece, job titles. How do you call your sales development rep? How is that sales development rep called in Germany, France, Italy, UK, Slovenia, Serbia, Bulgaria? You don't know that. That's where the research and the adaptation to these local norms comes into. It also, if I call it an SDR and the place where I would like to grow, there is no such kind of a profile, does that mean that that location doesn't support it? Maybe, maybe not. Further research and data needs to be collected in order to understand it. And then perhaps you've already nailed everything in that sense that we've already mentioned. What about the process? Who would be in charge of developing that team? Is it a person, a leader from the organization that has spent quite some time, believes in the culture, is actually an ambassador of the culture? Is it a person with a vision for that place? Is it someone local that you've just transitioned from one place to another that perhaps has roots in that place and understands the culture a bit more? That's an interesting one also to tackle in the adaptation of local norms. And then by thinking about the process and who will be in charge of that, how do you set up the recruitment? How many steps? What's the norm of steps? Is it a meeting and then at the end of the meeting, there's an offer? Would that be seen as premature? In some locations, yes. In others, that would be seen as a sign of these guys really want me, they know what they're doing. And again, going back to the whole thing of how you do the expansion, and that's a crucial one. When you have the people on board, who these people report into? What's the next? When we think about newcomers, we typically have a 30, 60, 90-day mark around onboarding. We talk about probation period, success meetings around it, end of year one reviews, etc. But what about when they join? Who would be their leader? Who they report into? Going back to time zone differences, language differences. Would there be barriers? According to different places, there might be barriers of how one expresses themselves. And once we're there, an interesting one is salary negotiations. Because you need to, well, if we're doing a go-to-market team, you would expect that the salary negotiation to be that first bit of a true sales experience, not an artificial one, that you get from your candidate. So a quick example, in Bulgaria, we do salary negotiations in monthly net. In Denmark, we've done salary negotiations in monthly gross. And the rest of the world, or the majority of the rest of the world, does it on annual gross. These are particularly interesting things when one ends in an interview and asks a question. I find myself in interesting situations where I'm not prepared to talk about monthly net or monthly gross or annual. So that conversion, that way of adapting and feeling aware of it, actually gives you the extra points in the long-term goal which you have. And then that's it to build that international market. And from salary negotiations, we go to compensation. What is the split between base and commission in the place where you want to grow? Actually, in the place that you want to grow, or you want to set foot, what is the commission code? What is the base code? You can have a base, you can have a gross salary. In Bulgaria, it's two different sums of money. The commission can be seen as a bonus in some places, or in others, it can be something completely else. So how do you talk about it? Then nailing the right split. Although we live in a globalized world where we take a globalized approach, sometimes the local touch of that globalized approach is the one that we're missing, and that's the key to success. And a few other bits, which may seem minor, but how do we talk about notice periods? In Germany, the notice period starts from the 1st of next month. Europe overall has a 2 to 3 month as a norm of a notice period, compared to the US, where we have 2 weeks, and that's absolutely fine. This doesn't mean that I don't want a job. It means that there's a difference there. Sometimes you can negotiate, sometimes you can buy me out, but that buyout may not be seen from a cultural perspective as a very good sign to leave your old employer in the tough situation that you live in. Same goes to probation periods. Up to 6 months in one places, 3 months in others. You may decide that your strategy will be, I'll give a month to everyone, because that's what we normally do. Do we do probation reviews? How do you handle it? And we go into the deep level and the deep waters of local labor laws. God forbid you have to dismiss people, you have to go through layoffs. That's a norm that we are currently seeing, especially in the tech sector. How do you do layoffs? Do you give a couple of salaries? Do you end positions? What's the labor law there? What does that labor law allow you? France is an interesting example around labor laws. So is Germany, so is Bulgaria. I know that the UK is a bit lenient, but that's a different market on its own. And the difference between, let's say, Bulgaria to the UK as the two farthest countries, it's a 3-hour flight. So for 3 hours, you change a lot of the perspective and a lot of things within that flight. Another point is acceptable start dates. First of the month or first Monday. If the first of the month is a Thursday, is it a Monday? How is that seen? Will I not have a job for a couple of days? How will that transition into the taxes I pay? Would I still have health insurance during that period? All of these topics matter when you would like, as a candidate on the market, as a talent on the market, when you're considering for new opportunities. And the company that understands the most of these local concerns or challenges or barriers, or in general your culture, the better. It's that quick snap, because we all are looking for the cultural fit when we're interviewing, but also the talent that we're interviewing is also looking at that cultural fit. And just adding 2 more points on the before side of things. One is on the approach of penetration in that new market. Would it be booming? Local media, which media would you choose? What language would you use? So going back to the language piece. Would it be confidential? Would you use the help of Halo? How would you approach it? Many companies decide to do direct approach, which entitles a different budget. So you start with not building your go-to-market function, but your recruitment function, but then your HR function, then finance. So that can be an interesting route to go to, depending on what the strategy is. Then you can choose the Halo option, or anything else which is on the market, which is a crucial thing again to understand. And last but not least, budget. So when we're hiring people, we often talk about market data, salary surveys. We can go to Mercer, OBNN, a lot of places where they will provide us with data. But that's data, which is in our hands a secondary data piece. So we're not taking it as a primary data source when that happens from getting it directly from the company. And sometimes that data may not show the specific city, the specific skill set that you're after. So here, outside of actually getting the hold of it, the trap there would be heavily relying on that data and putting all your budget based on the data without actually talking to the market or people that are within that market that are ready to consult you, help you in that sense, and put you in a very different place from a culturally aware perspective. And going towards now we have a team, regardless of the size. what do we do then? Or perhaps pause. What have you achieved? What's the market's feedback on you? Where do you want to go now? And then, are you going to expand? And if you're expanding further, how do you include the team in that expansion? And knowing that Luis is here, perhaps I'd like to turn to him so he can take us on that journey.
Sure. Thank you, Alexander. Super interesting stuff. For me, the biggest point that you've raised is the cultural fit, right? So we've hired a team, and now what, right? So in order to understand the biggest challenges, once you have the team and once they start working, I always like to put myself in the shoes, right, in the position of the GTM team. So how does a GTM team react to, let's say a company that is scaling, that is growing at a good pace? And it's a fragile situation. It's a situation in which you join a company, and sure, the product market fit has been proven already at some extent, because if not, you wouldn't be hiring a GTM team. But you don't have a certainty that is proven in the market that you're going to be working at. So you have to prove it, right? You have a lot of weight on your shoulders, and the company has gone through a lot of headaches in order to hire you and the rest of the team. As you can clearly express, if you have hired a team, there's many things that the company has gone through in order to get it right. They will need to experience and overcome these barriers of entry to the new market firsthand. So even though they can build on some of the processes and know-how that the company has already built, they will have to adapt them and develop them to the new market. And if you hire right, they will be successful. But even if you hire right, sometimes they might not be, because maybe the market is not ready. The existing competitors, existing dogs in the pen, they're not going to look kindly to the newcomers. They're going to try to, not give a piece of the bone to you. So, it's a challenging situation. And in reality, from the employee's perspective, they need to prove their value. They need to prove their existence in front of the company, in front of the people that hired them. Probation periods, like you mentioned, in Europe, they're key elements inside of your new hire. Particularly in Europe, after you pass the probation period, it's significantly harder to exit an employee. Depending on the country, it's really difficult or just moderately difficult, but as opposed to across the Atlantic, it's extremely difficult across the board. And most importantly, the companies are usually not equipped to deal with local regulations when hiring a GTM team that is not a GTM team, period, of course. So if we couple that with a division that happens between GTM teams and the core team, let's call it like that, there's a lot of issues that can happen. Time zone is one that you mentioned. That still happens after you hire. It's no longer about setting the interviews. It's no longer about interesting potential candidates. But if you have a team or a part of the team that is 3 to 4 time zones away, you're already sacrificing 50% of your work schedule, and you're making it asynchronous. So that's a key moment when you hire a GTM team to evaluate if your ways of working are adapted to a company that is trying to become global. Do you have synchronous rituals of working or asynchronous rituals of working? If you don't have them and you're not facilitating that adaptation to the time zones, it's a moment to take a look at yourself and the expectations that you have of your employees. Either you're going to be asking of your GTM team to have really weird timetables. I'm talking like start to work at 4 or 5 a.m. or finish to work at 10 p.m. Or you're going to have to adapt the rest of your company to the GTM team. The second topic that you mentioned that I think is interesting is diversity and inclusion, right? And then we talk about representation. So you hire a new team, they are, in a new market, let's assume a few time zones away. How does the leadership team look in your company? How do success stories look in your company? Like the people that typically get promoted, the high performers, are they diverse enough? Do you have a path or leadership potential that is diverse enough to motivate these people to be great and to succeed in your company? Or is it just really lopsided? In my experience, it tends to be lopsided when you start hiring GTM teams, and as the companies become more global, that's something that they eventually handle, take care of. But it's something that, the earlier you get a head start on, the better, because then you're going to avoid problems. That, of course, goes for across all roles, right? GTM teams are usually hired in sales, marketing, so go-to-market teams. But in many companies, you have to adapt the existing product. Most of my experience is biased into technology, so it depends, but due to regulatory issues, not all technology can be released or it needs to be adapted to the new market. So that's also a work that the engineering teams have to do. And then my favorite topic as a psychologist, culture, which you mentioned in many approaches, right? How do you start working with a team when you're used to working in a certain way and you don't know what you're gonna face? This is an interesting, because you've talked about religion, you've talked about like rituals, you've talked about holidays. These are all parts of culture. And there's always, in every company, at any given point, there's always a predominant set of cultural norms. They're really influenced by the country of origin of the company, especially those companies that are, starting on country and then they globalize little by little. And they're also influenced, of course, by the culture that the company wants to create. I was going to say impose, but you cannot impose a culture. You can try to create it, and then it happens with the behaviors of the people. And there's a case study that I actually think is really interesting to compare. So it's a case study that happened in 1990. It was a plane accident. It was the Avianca case 052. So it was I'll just tell you the short story about it. And if anyone that is listening is interested in checking it out, I think it's one of the most interesting case studies in terms of cultural communication and how it can affect something that is really regulated. In airplane travel, the good thing about this, horrible thing that the plane crashed, of course, 73 people died, so that's horrible. But the interesting thing about this case is that everything is recorded because the communications happen between flight control and the pilots. And it was a Colombian flight that had to land in New York City. It was a particularly stormy day, and they just basically couldn't have the capacity to land all these planes. And the Colombian plane, the Avianca plane, was running down on fuel, right? So they asked the flight control to please give them priority to land, okay? They just asked for priority. And this is what the rule book said. The rule book said, please ask for priority. The flight control, of course, was pushing back because they couldn't land enough planes. They had a lot of planes running down on fuel, and they didn't understand exactly the level of emergency that the plane had. The crew thought that they had raised their concerns several times through asking repeatedly for priority. That was the key word that they used, right? Flight control asked them to do an extra loop before landing, and they eventually ran out of fuel and crashed. During the investigation, and this is the truly interesting part in terms of like what happened culturally and at the communication level, the American investigators thought that it was crazy that they had not raised an emergency. And that's the word they use, right? Emergency. However, the Colombian investigators said, what are you talking about? We raised the emergency, we asked for priority a several amount of times. So somewhere in that communication chain, they were both trying to say the same thing, but the link was broken, right? And this is in something where, the sets of procedures, the safety measures that the aviation industry has, they're best in class. If not, like the amount of planes that crash is surprisingly low. I'm not an aviation expert at all, by the way. Maybe I'm going out on a limb here. But this is, a clear example of what happens when you don't look for and proactively agree on what things mean when you're working on a globalized team. So the challenge is clear. The challenge is how can I talk to people that maybe don't understand the same thing that I do? And then we'll talk about the strategies later. But like I can advance that one is talk about things and put them on the table, and everyone should agree what things mean, right? And this happens in GTM teams. Hopefully not in the same scale of disaster, but this happens as well because success might look like different things. Feedback might look like different things, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if Rachel wants to add something to this.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? And I think it is that considering, what a remote team need in terms of communication, in terms of the culture side. And I think what I've discovered in the time I've been here is, really understanding what everybody needs, and you can't over communicate. It's making sure that you don't presume that somebody will know to read that on their first day, or to reach out to somebody if they're not sure about something. So I think over communication with a remote team is just so key. So no, agree with everything that you've just said there, Louis.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Yeah, this question can go on, and I knew this will be the longest one. But we can go to the next one that we have, and this is, so while keeping company culture on top of mind, which is something we discussed so much and it's very important. And so what strategies has your team seen success with in terms of retaining that talent once is there? Luis, let's hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I mean, the strategies that work the best are, in my experience, those that address the out-group versus in-group dynamic. So when you hire a GTM team, in psychology, we have this concept called out-group versus in-group. It's a really simple concept. It's basically saying that if you're in-group, you identify with the group that you're referring to. So for example, I'm from Spain. I identify as an in-group of Spaniard, as an in-group of European, but I don't identify as a group of, I don't know, German, for example. It's really easy to do it in terms of countries, in terms of companies, and ad hoc groups is more complicated, right? So what can the company do to make this team, this GTM team, feel like part of the company? First, time zone issues, reviewing the company rituals, right? Are the communications, all hands, town halls, global company meetings, are they in a time zone, in a timetable that is friendly to all the company? If not, it would be worth evaluating, alternating them. This is something that, for example, we do right now at Revolut. We have WBRs, weekly business reviews. One week they are on a European-friendly timetable, on another one they're on an Asian-friendly timetable, so that everyone can join. And of course, we record everything so that if people cannot join, they can look at it at a different date. Over communicating, Rachel was saying it, I completely agree. But really, it's a really isolating thing when you have to find out information afterwards and you feel left out of important elements of the information just because you were not able to attend because you were with your family or sleeping in some cases. Then regarding those live meetings, is there an information penalty? Is there an expectation of people to attend these live meetings? If yes, and they're not in a friendly time zone, I would strongly urge you to reconsider that. You either make it for everyone, make it easy for everyone to attend, or you should make it that asynchronous should be the default way of working. Then representation. If your leadership team is not representative of the whole company and is specifically focused on a subsector of the demography, there's ways to make people feel more represented without switching their whole leadership team, understanding that that's not easy or possible. But in these company events, thinking about the all hands, the town hall, these presentations, give visibility to the GTM teams. Everyone knows about success stories that happen in the headquarters, that happen in people close to the leadership team. But give the chance to these people to speak, give the chance for these people to share their success, and then the whole team will welcome them more as well, as they will all partake in the successes. And then in terms of HR, understanding that there's probably a lot of HR speakers, HR professionals that are gonna listen to this. We need to reevaluate our HR stack. We need to reevaluate our learning development, our feedback culture, our performance. Does it apply and is it clear to everyone what you're trying to achieve? Or did you land on a set of policies and initiatives that fit well with what your company culture is, but doesn't fit with, first of all, an inclusive culture that adapts to anyone, no matter what their background might be, but also the company that you want to be a few years from now, because it's relatively simple to create something for the company you're now. It's a more difficult thing to future-proof it and allow the company to scale while maintaining those things that you want to encourage. So a profound review has to happen at all levels.
Absolutely. Anyone else has something to add, Alexander?
I do. Thinking about the culture and company culture and the strategy that the team has. I think when we're going to another location, we have to communicate. Well, actually, everything starts with communication and ends with communication. Even the today event starts with communication. We're still communicating. So how do we define, how do we communicate our mission statement? How do we say what our key cultural aspects are? And what is our DNA as an organization? So we're not talking about the local infringements, which I mentioned before, but this is on the bigger, some may say corporate, others vision level. Which are the 3, 5, 6 words which are the key ones that once we're doing an outperform award, if you wish, one recognizes their achievement within these 5, 3, doesn't matter how many words. And then when we think about the communication, what is the visualization of it? Is it the background of Zoom conversations? We mentioned the all-hands meetings, company-wide meetings, so the guys that represent the organization are speaking in these meetings, how they communicate that culture, that mission, that vision. And then it all falls into the brand awareness, employer branding, where does employer branding starts from the employees, then it goes to market, then it's marketing, talent acquisition, HR, everyone becomes a brand ambassador. But how do you define it? And then what is my exposure as an employee to the brand? How is the brand being made tangible for me so that it can make a difference? One can say a pen. I'd say a starter pack. Remote teams, how do you send starter packs to remote teams? How do you define, on one hand, your mission, and how is that mission and your vision and your CSR responsibilities in that starter pack? Would you do pens? Well, are they eco-friendly? Maybe not. Would you do bottles? Would you do plastic, glass, etc.? And although, again, this may sound funny, and perhaps some senior executives may not see it as a huge thing, if I'm seeing the brand that I work for every single day on my screen, on my desk, laptop, everywhere, at some point, I'll be touching that brand, and I would like to be associated with that brand if everything's going well, of course. So what opportunities, again, as an employee, has to interact with the brand? Some of our brands are B2B. Well, Luis is Revolut, so I get his brand every single day. I get your refer a friend stuff, which makes me interact with it. And then perhaps we're starting another conversation, which may be another conversation for 3 minutes, and that's the talent experience, which is a whole different thing. These are the points that I wanted to add, and I fully agree with Luis and his vision around the stack and everything else that he mentioned.
I mean, I don't know if you want me just to add a little bit. I know we haven't got a lot of time, but for me, scaling Virtuoso, I mean, there's always you know the things that you would like to do for employer branding and for culture, and there's a tick list of things that are very expensive and are very difficult to do when your team is so spread out across the globe. So I think for me and my team, it's been focusing on what we can do, and that goes right back to candidate experience, making sure people coming through the recruitment process have a great experience, so that if we're trying to attract talent into the business, we don't have this sort of negativity out there, and we have people that will happily recommend coming and applying for a role here. But then once people do start, it's lovely to send them, really nice swag. It's nice for them to have a polished office with a pool table and a free food to go to. But when you're working sort of remotely and you've got people working from, the home in India to the home in the US, you've got to find a way of them actually making connections with their colleagues and feeling part of something. And that's what we work really hard to do. And it's not massively costly, but it is time consuming. It's something that, we have to put a lot of thought into. So for us, it's making sure that, people have a great onboarding experience. They meet lots of people. They really resonate with the brand, no matter what part of the business they're from. They know how their bit or their role will contribute to our success. They understand where we're going. And then we do a lot for them to form bonds and relationships with other colleagues remotely, by trying to be inventive weekly on our sort of Tuesday huddles, we call them. And we do various different things, from wellbeing activities to various speakers to gaming activities where we all join. We've recently set up a sort of virtual office on a software platform where we all meet in there and play games and just various little fun things, really, that, not everybody joins every week, but it's a way for them to actually join, not talk about their day-to-day, and to meet colleagues where they would never normally have come across. It's almost like that water cooler moments or making a coffee in the kitchen moments that we're trying to reproduce. And that for us is working well. and it's something we want to continue to build on.
This was amazing, Rachel. Thank you. We're gonna go to the next question because we can go on and on definitely about a lot of these questions. So we're just kind of touching on, but one of the questions: what are key success factors for those who are achieving success in building a GTM team? Rachel, if you'd like to speak about that, because you definitely had a lot of success.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's nice of you to say so, because it does feel like something like an uphill battle sometimes when you're trying to attract, you know, the talent that's needed in these sort of situations where, you know, you're recruiting worldwide and you're a new business with a new product with a very, you know, an employer brand that's not necessarily well known. So it isn't easy. And I think, you know, we're always learning and we're always making mistakes and we're trying to learn from them. But I think for us, what we've learned over the last couple of years is, first of all, we've needed to have a very streamlined and sort of fast hiring process, from sort of when the person applies to when a decision's made. You know, candidate is king, and we found that, you know, they're obviously, if they're good, they're applying for our role and a number of others. So we try and make that experience as good as possible and to get to the finish line as quickly as possible, whilst at the same time making sure they're going to be right for the role, of course, and not making decisions that are going to mean that we have a lot of churn. So we've worked quite hard on our process to make sure that's involves the right people, and also involves people that can sell our business to these candidates, because that's as much of a job as us, them selling themselves to us. So that's the first thing I'd say, is make your process, you know, maximum 10 days, you know, a week if you can, even better. And not too heavy on the work sort of the candidate has to do in their own time. I appreciate for sales roles, you want to hear them present, or you want to hear how they'll come across to a customer. So I don't see why you can't incorporate that, and we do, but we don't ask them to do 2 or 3 hours prep, because again, if they're interviewing for 5 or 6 roles, we find that can be quite off-putting and can sometimes prevent the candidate from attending. So we keep that really lean. And then in terms of success beyond that, you know, beyond the offer, you know, you haven't got that person until they start. So notice periods are a dangerous time, counter offers. You know, we do a lot of work with keeping in touch with people. We've been finding more recently that there's been like 3 months notice periods are quite common. So making sure they're really integrated into our culture even before they start. You know, they can start doing some learning, some background reading. We get them to meet their colleagues. We invite them to the Tuesday huddles. We try and get them to speak to their line manager maybe once every fortnight, just to keep them really engaged and excited about joining. Beyond that, I think I mentioned it before, but it's a really smooth onboarding process with lots of interaction from colleagues. We've done a lot of work the last 12 months on making sure our onboarding delivers what these go-to-market people need in order to be ramped up and all firing and able to succeed in their roles. And that goes from, you know, really understanding the product, the value of the product, to knowing who they need to know in the business to help them to feel connected to the business, to understand our mission, you know, just to feel really excited and motivated to start. So we have a really thorough 2-week onboarding session, which has some sort of, I want to say assessment gateways. I don't mean that in terms of they might fail, but just to make sure that we're all on track and we're giving them the individuals the support they need. And of course, onboarding goes beyond 2 weeks, but that's the initial sort of intense period, I suppose. And again, with it being remote, it's really important that those check-ins are done and we know that people are on track. And then I think the other thing I would say just finally is making sure that you've got, if you're a lean business with very few team leads and very few leaders in each geography, it's making sure that you're investing in the people that are going to be, you know, mentoring or being their direct line manager of these new starters. And again, that was tough for us at first because we had people in different geographies and they were the only person, you know, doing that role for a new company, you know, in that geography, and they were sort of left to it a little bit. So we're working quite hard on developing sort of team leads, buddies, mentors, to make sure that there is somebody not necessarily in the same town or, you know, even the same country, but that we are investing in that next line of people to make sure that every new starter we bring on, whether it's an SDR or whether it's a, you know, vice president of sales in a country, you know, that they have the support they need to be successful in their role. And that's becoming more and more important to us as we grow.
Awesome. Anyone else on this subject?
I can perhaps I really echo what Rachel mentioned from candidate is king, and then the assessment has to be done with a certain level of finesse, in all fairness, because of the supply and demand kind of ratio, which is why the candidate is becoming king nowadays. But perhaps thinking about the key success factors is when you're penetrating a new market, have fun at what you're doing and make sure that you enjoy your role, because you're the face of that new place, which the test will be seen at the first time. So unless you are to an extent emotionally involved within the company, understanding the portfolio of the products, and you're able to be put on the hot seat and answer questions which you may have never heard before, perhaps the organization is recognizing the person that's doing this company. So that's also a key. That's what I want to.
Absolutely. I'm going to go to a last question, which is kind of like a conclusion. I'll ask everyone to kind of give us the last advice or tip. So what advice or tips do you have for succeeding in building go-to-market teams internationally? So kind of like a conclusion to this discussion. Anyone can start. Alexander?
Thank you. I think the idea of never stop the thought process around improvement. You start from there. Well, actually, you've already started with the vision and finding the people that share that vision of yours, and you combine your vision with their vision, which is already the same goal, being successful and generating more revenue to the organization. Eventually, going on the New York Stock Exchange or any other stock exchange and becoming a publicly traded company. That's part of the roadmap. Then the improvement thing should come in. The moment you set a foot and you pause and you say, no, it's all good, that's when you have to question, is it really all good? Then the other piece of it, that's after you have the go-to-market team built, you have to be consistent. And you have to be consistent in messaging, in your reward structures, in compensation, in the messaging, in the vision, in the strategy. You have to be consistent in the way you communicate with everyone in the company, especially your go-to-market team. Not neglecting anyone else, but here we're talking about revenue generating. And these are the people that are selling the unique product that the technology team or engineering team has built, the unique product that the customer support or technical support people are helping with the help of everyone else sitting in the broader group in G&A functions, treatment, for example. So being consistent doesn't mean being consistent internally only. It means being consistent with your messaging outside the company. Being in the same places over and over again, having this consistency is what matters to them. Then the global vision bit or the vision piece. Have a global vision, of course, 100%, but then allow a local touch. That finesse, what I'm talking about, that's the local touch that makes you stand out from the crowd, that makes you be something new. And then I want to leave it to Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, I'd sort of echo the what you said at the beginning there, Alexander, about the vision, making sure everyone's aligned to the vision. Something that's really important. You know, I would just say the other thing from my perspective, scaling here at Virtuoso is, you know, sort of identify. I mean, obviously we have a long list of things that we'd like people to have experience-wise, domain knowledge, all those sort of things, but it's really understanding sort of the characteristics which just doesn't matter where you are from, you know, from in the world. You know, if you're, you know, a certain type of character and you would fit in to our organization, then that's really important. And I think it's identifying what those characteristics are, who are gonna find this environment appealing, who are gonna thrive in this type of environment, knowing where you are at the moment as a business. You know, have you got everything in place? Have you got every process in place? Probably not. So not everybody is going to thrive in that environment, but there are certain people that will thrive in a certain type of business at a certain stage and will resonate with what you're trying to do from a product basis as well. I think for us, it's staying true to that, and you know, where we haven't stayed true to it, and we've thought this person has great experience on paper, but maybe hasn't got those, you know, other things that we're looking for. It's never really worked out. So I think it's just really being true to that and identifying what your company values are, and being honest about where you are as a business and what support you provide individuals, and you know, looking at if that person's going to thrive in that environment or not, and being honest about it. And I think honesty, transparency is just so important, and setting the scene from day one and making sure that, you know, you start that relationship on a really strong foundation.
Well, to me, would be just be ready to adapt, right? What has worked before doesn't have to work in the new markets. So be ready to question everything that you've been doing until now, and be open to the ideas that your new team is going to bring forward.
That's definitely great, Luis. I agree. So we're going to go to Q&A just because we have such a great discussion, but I know we don't have a lot of time. So one question that has came up just now, a couple of minutes ago, that I think it's really important to talk about right now, before, is, has your organization been planning to deal with a recession at all? Has anything in your recruiting strategy or compensation strategy changed? Whoever would like to go first.
And I can add to that. I mean, I think, yeah, it has. I mean, I'm not saying our the way we recruit and our hiring's changed dramatically, but we have been mindful of the impact of the recession, and maybe, you know, being a little bit more careful with, you know, sort of what we spend, you know, on how we hire. We would never look at a recession as a way to underpay or undervalue people, of course, because that just doesn't make any sense in terms of people's motivation and success. However, we have been, you know, we have been more mindful on, you know, making sure that we don't hire too many people too fast. And, you know, it's like a juggling game in terms of hiring enough go-to-market people against product people, against all your other functions of the business, and constantly having conversations about, you know, do we really need that role, or can we invest a little bit more in this position, and just being more mindful of, you know, the salary costs. And also within that, I have to say, what we have been trying to do and what I've been pushing for, and we've been doing more recently, is recognizing our internal, the people that are with us. You know, I'm never a believer in bringing somebody into the business, you know, and not recognizing that there's somebody sat in a role on a lower salary or a lower compensation. So it's not forgetting about the people that you've got internally just because there is a recession on. The last thing we want to do is lose our talent. So even more emphasis has been put on retention, training, and identifying those high performers that we really need to protect and make sure they're not a flight risk. So that's what we're doing, as well as just keeping a close eye on the spend.
I agree. There's no dramatic change. A lot of discussions around the recruitment positions and if they're really needed. So it's about making sure that every position that is recruited for is absolutely needed. I mean, this is something that should be done in any sensible recruitment process across the board, but it's true that as companies scale, sometimes things go out of hand, and, you know, you need people in the ground, you need them now, so you start to recruit. So really, in a recession environment, in my experience, the conversation shifts to how can we get the best people possible, making sure that they're the best people possible, and then retain them. There's been a lot of layoffs lately. It seems like for the last month, every week there's a new massive layoff going on. But the requirement for strong, high-performing talent is always going to be there, and it's always going to be on short supply, right? So the companies need to shift to how can we hire and identify that high-performing talent, both, you know, in the candidate section when we want to onboard them, and once they're in the company, we cannot forget about that. and then how can we retain them? Underpaying high performing talent is like shooting yourself in the foot. It makes no sense.
Alexander?
Yes, please. To what Louis was saying, yes, we're seeing a lot of companies doing layoffs, and one of the reasons why I hate LinkedIn at the moment is whenever I go in and I'm starting to see all the news. So not a positive way to start my day now, but what we're seeing is the moment we start to talk about recession and planning for a recession, some organizations jump the gun and do the pull, or that's a very political way of saying having freeze. And then that's done on a very executive level, and the messaging is missing from top to down, which ends in a very interesting situation where rumors start. So the best option there, when you do planning about recession, of course you're hiring the right people. Let's say for this conversation, we're in a vacuum and our headcount plan is actually in place. It's reaching what it should be reaching, so budgets are well taken care of. We're on the top of everything, so we're right where we would like to. I go back to the messaging and the communication, and my idea that everything starts and ends with communication. Yes, the planning for recession is imminent. You have to think about a plan B, plan C, plan D, etc. But how you communicate, what do you tell? Are you still present in front of your team, in front of your organization? Would you still consider expanding? And if you're expanding, what kind of a function you would like to expand? What is your option in front of you when it gets to recruitment? Would you consider external partners? Would you just rely on your internal team? Do you have any? And then last but not least, communication. A ton of missing communication. That's the key bit. We are all saying global organizations. We're all tackling the remote scenarios. And then again, when we're saying recession, it seems that organizations are not doing it right when it gets to communication. So changes in recruitment strategy, they can occur 100%, but you would need to have strong senior leadership to pull and to make the decisions on time, rather than a conservative approach, which we've seen with COVID and everything else. We've seen a conservative approach, and that conservative approach meant, let's stall for a minute. Going back to constant improvement, you don't stall, you think on your feet, you make decisions. You need decision makers, which are commercially aware and are sitting in the right seats for a reason, not because they've been 10 years in the company. So once you're in such a seat, and you're seeing that something's happening because you are doing financial times or have a business review and actually you subscribe to them, you can plan ahead. And instead of going for a super senior person in location A, consider cost-effective, low-cost solutions in other locations, or even, what about a graduate? What about an entry-level person? It doesn't mean to be a graduate. It can be in some organizations that are called untraditional profile, someone that's entry-level, that will have the energy, that will have the motivation. You teach them the role, but then you won't have to pay the big bucks for a senior or a principal level person. That's one of the recruitment strategies which I think would work. When it gets to compensation, that's a very hard one, because you need to retain your people. You need to keep your annual reviews. You need to make sure that when you get to, let's say, a 9-box assessment, you have a good plan and a good think about your team. But by good thing, I mean you don't need only high performance, because then what do you do with them? You do a 20% increase at the end of the year for a team of 100 people or a team of 5 people. Is that possible? No. How do you give them the strategy to move ahead in the case that we are currently at? So you need a good mix of people within your team. Don't judge based on who has looked at your LinkedIn profile or who hasn't. Judge on the skill set that these people are providing in front of you. And actually, we are all entering, we should be entering an interview with one question only. Can that person in front of me do the job? And we can all give 100 reasons why the person cannot do the job. I'm interested in the reasons why the person can. So in the recession bit, in the layoffs kind of thing, if your product is in decline, you would already be out of a market if you're not thinking innovative things. You're doing fairly okay. If you're meeting your goals, it doesn't matter because your product is in demand in some business. The guys that you hire, the people that are on your own team, and the sound decisions that you've made, ideally in a 2-day recruitment process, these would put you forward in the game which we're currently seeing.
Today is quite utopical. But you know, we gotta aim, we gotta be bold.
There you go. We're all looking forward to the 3-day recruitment process. So I don't think we have time for another question because, like I said, the great discussion today. I'm really grateful to everyone. Special thank you to our panelists for such a rich discussion. Scan their QR code on the screen to connect with them on LinkedIn. And then don't forget also to check out our YouTube channel for the past events for the Halo series, where we feature thought leaders in a one-on-one setting where they discuss what is keeping them up at night. Thank you everyone that attended, and we will have a version uploaded on YouTube very soon. And I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.